So tonight we'll discuss the Aseret Hadibros, popularly known as the Ten Commandments, but really it's a misnomer. It's really the 10 principles, which we'll be reading about, by the way, this coming Shabbos, Parshas Yisro. The Torah talks about the 10 Commandments in two places. One in Exodus, that we'll be reading this week, Yisro, and another time in Deuteronomy, usually in the summer, in Va'eschanan. So it's the 10 principles, the 10 statements, etc. So number one, let me just go over what the 10 are. So number one is the belief in God. Number two, not to worship idols. Number three, saying God's name in vain. Number four, the only ritual in the 10 Commandments, Shabbos, also this week's Parsha, is to keep the Shabbos, to remember the Shabbos, Kiddush, etc. 5, honoring mommy and daddy, as we were talking about. 6, and we move over to the second tablets. 6 is not to murder. 7, not to commit adultery. 8, not to give false testimony. 9, right, so we had adultery, we skip one, not to steal, or signo of kidnapping, not to steal was 8. 9, not to give false testimony. And number 10 is, which we'll spend some time on as well, is not to covet someone else's property. So those are the 10. As we discussed previously, as the Nachmanides points out, they represent the two categories of commandments. The first 5 are commandments between man and God, and the second 5 are commandments between man and man, interpersonal. And we pointed out honoring one's parents is a perfect transition between, because on one hand they're our creators, they're also people. Right. So that's the 10 commandments. So let's just focus on number 10 for a minute. So number 1, it seems to be out of place. Like, we're talking not to murder, not to worship idols, not to commit adultery, and you know what? Don't covet someone else's property. It seems to be minor leagues, or CFL, as some might say. In other words, how could you compare the two? Like, okay, I agree, you shouldn't covet someone else's property, but to say it makes the top 10 list, I mean, there must be...
Sorry, and is it specifically property?
Well, actually, it's not just right.
Oh, okay.
It's also, no, it's not...
Don't covet anything.
Or also not to covet someone else's wife,
Yeah, okay. So just,
right,
okay.
it's covet in general, yeah. So we'll get to that, right. So, how did it make the top 10 list? In fact, I remember it goes way back. I was watching, I think it was Larry King Live. I think he's since retired. Not that I watched it that often. But I guess one night, I don't know, it must have been changing. It probably goes back 20 years ago, I don't remember. So I guess Dr. Laura, the psychologist, her. So she just wrote a book, I guess, The 10 Commandments. So maybe that's why I just turn on the 10 Commandments, see what they have to say. So I remember Larry King, like I asked, but tell me, which one is the most important? Which is the most? So I don't remember what she answered, but our answer, number 1, is you can't say the reason. Right before the 10 Commandments is God gave them in one utterance. He said the 10 Commandments in one breath, something that is impossible for human beings to comprehend. So the question, obviously, of what before he gave it that we could comprehend, he said at one time in one utterance. So the question is obvious: why waste our time? Why say it in one single utterance if no one understands what you're talking about? We're not a religion of miracles, meaning God does miracles, but we don't make miracles for the sake of miracles. God is not showing off his ability to do a miracle. You know what? Well, what do you think of this one? And he'll ramble up. That's not the way it works here. So what's he doing? So that's what the rabbis tell us, to teach us. Everyone's going to ask me, what's the most important commandment? And the answer is, they're all equal. because see, obviously you have to start, as human beings, you can't do 10 at a time, so you gotta pick one, two, but God initially did them all to show that no, they're all equal, and therefore, now let me go through each one, but don't think that one's more important than the other. So that begs the question then, how does not to covet someone's property or covet anything, how is that on the same level as committing adultery, out of worship? It seems to be out of place. And also the number 10 in general usually signifies the end of a unit. Like basically, if you understand number 10, it tells you about the whole unit. So there's something, what's the secret of lo sachmo, not to desire someone else's property? It seems to be something in this commandment that is the key, is the mystery behind the 10 commandments. So we'll have to try to understand that a little bit. So there's an interesting story in Navi. There was in the Rambam. The Rambam says, Maimonides says, if you want to understand the portion of not to covet, you have to study well this portion we have in Tanakh in the prophets. There's a story. I don't know if you're familiar with it or not. So I'll give you the quick summary. There was this king Ahav. I guess I'm familiar with the Hebrew names, but I'll try to make up some English names for them. King Ahav, he was a bad king, and there was this person, Novice, and he owned a certain vineyard. He was a good guy. He happened to be a chazan, also a cantor. That's not relevant now, but the point was that that's also a gift. If God gives you a good voice, you have to use it for... Everyone has their own gifts, and whatever God gives you have to use it, to help people, etc. So he had a vineyard that the king wanted. And it wasn't part of the king wanting it as being a king, or else we have those laws that government can take your property if they want to run a public domain. What's that called? There's whatever it's called again, eminent domain or something, where the government can take your property. So there is a concept like that in halacha, but that's only if you're taking it as the president, as Mr. President. You can't just take it as because me personally, I like this field, I want it for my own possession. So he wanted it for his own stuff. So, and then, I guess he was willing to offer his money for it. He says, you know what, don't waste my time. I'm never going to sell it because it's from my ancestors and it's sentimental value. Don't even think about it. So the king went home sulking, and his wife Jezebel, who was even worse than him, said, "What are you sulking about?" So Achav tells him over the story, and she said, "What are you sulking about? You're the king. You can do whatever you want. You're the mightiest person in the world." And she said, "Okay, you know what? Okay, I'll take care of it for you." So she makes up a story. She hires two false witnesses to make up a story about Navi, so they could go that he did something that he's liable to the death penalty. Because the law is, if you kill by Beis Din, by the Jewish court, so the children get the inheritance. But if you kill by the king, so then the king gets it. So she concocted a whole story that he'd be killed by the king, and then we'd get everything. So that was the story. So Maimonides says, study very hard about what happens here, and we'll learn about the essence of lo sachmo. So I'll come back to this story at the end. So Maimonides tells us there are actually three levels. When we talk about not to desire someone's property, we're going to see, according to Maimonides, there are going to be three levels. We'll go from less severe to more severe. So, and in fact, then we'll deal with the famous question of the Even Ezra of how could God, it's one thing God tell me not to kill, not to murder, not to punch someone, not to commit adultery, or to shake the fourth species, to eat matzah. So that's in the realm of action. But how could God command me on something in my thought process? I can't control my thoughts. Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. Things pop in our minds all the time. It's not like it's premeditated. So how could the famous question of the evidence, how could you command me not to, let's say I walk in, I like this person's house or yard or wife or whatever, I'm saying I can't help, I'm not going to act on it, but what do you want from me? So that's his question. We'll come up with some answers to it shortly. That's his question. So Maimonides gives us 3 levels. Number 1 is, he says, let's say you walk outside, or someone drives down with a nice car, or someone, you walk down, this house, I love this house, I want this house. Well, they just got the new iPad 3 that's coming out soon in theory. Or they have, your laptop, or they have Sling, you can make up the list from here or there. There are plenty of toys today people want. So you're telling me I violated biblical prohibition? I walk out and I see this beautiful home, car. No, so the Rabbi says, no, that's not what the Torah is talking about. It's not a good thing to desire other people's property, but that's more of it's something just to work on yourself. It's a characteristic trait. You should be happy with your lot. You should be sameach bechalko. Who is the one who is wealthy? The one who's happy with what they have. So it's not a good thing, but you don't violate a biblical prohibition because you like someone's iPad or the Mac Pro or whatever. That is more instinct. You should just work on yourself. Or, as I'll give you the Evan Ezra's answer, the Evan Ezra's, he was a medieval commentator. He's a classical commentator on Chumash, on the Bible, and other places. He says, you know what the problem is? It shows you're lacking faith in God. You're lacking emunah, belief. Because why? Because we believe on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, it's determined how much money we're going to make that year or what's going to happen during the year. So basically, what you're saying is, when you desire something you don't have, you're saying, well, God, wait a second, what's good? God, you don't really understand. I need that iPad, or I need that. So you're telling, so basically, the print, of course, I don't mean someone who's sitting home and sleeping all day and not working. I mean, someone you have to go out and put in you have to have a job, go work. If you're sitting and lying in bed, of course you're not going to get anything. That's not part of it. The assumption is you're going to make the norm, whatever is considered a normal way of making a living, that's what you're going to be doing. But then if you don't get it, so it shows you're lacking faith. Because if God thinks I should have it, then I should have it. And in fact, some even take it a step further. Let's say your glasses, not your frames, but let's say your lenses. Like, should I desire your lenses? No, I would say not only should I desire it. If I put on your glasses, it's probably I'll see worse now because your glasses. So basically, you should view it as someone else that's tailor-made for him. So the evidence says the reason it's just by desiring someone else's property is you're lacking faith in God. In fact, he gives an example. He says, let's say you're a peasant, a poor person. So a poor person doesn't dream of marrying the king's daughter. This is not going to happen. It's too far removed that you're not going to even think about it. But a peasant might think of marrying someone, more on his level. Or no one thinks about jumping to the moon because that's something crazy. So the evidence says that's the way we should view other people's property. We should view it's like jumping to the moon, jumping off the roof. It's so far removed, it's nothing to do with me. So that's how the Evan Ezra says it's more of an issue of lacking belief. But either way, that's Maimonides. The first level is you don't violate a biblical prohibition, but you should work on yourself. It's never a good thing to desire other people's stuff. And in general, it usually ties into if you're happy with your lot, then you're usually not unhappy when someone else says something. It's more when we're unhappy about ourselves. That's when other people having something bothers us. But if we're happy with what we have, it doesn't really bother us so much that other people have other things. That's the first level. The second level is actually the Torah uses 2 different words. The other word he uses is tisaved, like desire. So there's 2 words for desire. Losis Ave, and then there's Chemda, so we'll explain the differences. The first level of desire, Maimonides writes, is, let's say, okay, the first level, which wasn't a sin per se, it was more, I wasn't thinking, I couldn't help it. I saw something I liked and I had a desire for it. But it wasn't premeditated. The second level is, you know what? I want this person's fill in the blank. And I start making a plan of attack. You know, I'm going to get this. You start doing X, Y, Z, A, B, C. You have a whole plan of attack, how I'm going to get this. But the bottom line, at the end of the day, you don't actually implement the plan. But the fact that you made this plan and it was premeditated, that you violate the second level of losis. That's already a violation of losis ava, desire. You desired something, you made a plan of attack, except you didn't actually take it. That's the second level. But you only violate the third level of losach mode if you have a plan of attack and you actually take the object. You don't violate losach, but until you actually take the object, you end up with the object that you desired. So my mind says there's three levels. One is, this more is an instinctive desire for something. You didn't really think about it. It happened to be in front of you and you liked it. Number two is you made a plan of attack to get it, but you never executed. You did back down at the end. And the third one was you made a plan of attack and you actually did it. So Maimonides writes, that's when you violate losach mode. So therefore we have a very simple answer to the Evan Ezra's question. His question was, how could God demand, it's one thing to demand us not to do action, but how can you demand us not to think something? I can't help what I think. The answer is you're right. You can't help what you can think, but you don't violate losach until you actually take it, as the Rambam says. So it's not a question, according to Maimonides, until you actually take the object. Until you actually take the object, you don't violate this biblical prohibition. So in fact, interesting, Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, one of the rabbis who lived a couple of 100 years ago in Germany, he writes, this is one of the proofs of God. There's certain commandments that prove God more than others. So he says, imagine a king, the Prime Minister, President Obama, whoever, he gets up tomorrow and says, you know what, I'm making a new rule in North America. You know what the rule is? I don't want you thinking, desiring other people's property, or I don't want you thinking how bad whatever it is. So obviously it's a joke. How could the president, they can't tell me what I'm thinking. You have no idea what I'm thinking, so I'll think it all I want. So the whole thing's a joke. So that's one of the proofs of God. No other king can make, who else can make a rule about thinking? Only someone who actually knows what you're actually thinking. But the average president or king of flesh and blood, they can't make up that type of rule. So that's, parenthetically, that's one of the proofs, of God, that only God can make up a rule about even trying to control the way we, to try to gear us into thinking properly. So those are the three levels. So Maimonides says you don't violate it until you take it. But there's a question on Maimonides, because Maimonides says, he says you don't violate it until you take it, and then he says usually we don't have it today, but usually when you violate one of the prohibitions, it doesn't apply anymore. We don't have a court of law. But for certain things, you get a good old-fashioned whooping. Makis, back in the day, they took out the strap not too long ago. Our parents, but I'm saying it isn't certainly their parents. But basically, you got a punishment in the court of law for doing something. So Maimonides writes, someone who violated losach mode, coveting, meaning, and they actually took it, so they don't get, there's no punishment. Why is there no? Usually there is a punishment by God. You'll get punished by God, but why is there no punishment in the court of law? Because since You only get punishments for sins that involve action. Sins that don't involve action, there's no punishment. So Maimonides seems to contradict himself. He just finished saying 2 seconds ago, the only time you violate this is when you do the action. You have to actually take it. If you only did act up to stage 2, there's no violation. He said, you don't violate lo sachmod until you actually take it. Then he says, you know what? You know why there's no punishment? Because there's no action. So what? So you hear the question, doesn't make any sense. He said, I only violate until I do an action, but then he says there is no action. So how do we reconcile? So the answer is like this. This is the secret of Osach. So really what Maimonides is saying is, really Osach mode is really a crime of the heart. It's really something, it's a sin in the heart that you're doing. But we all know it's very hard to judge how far your heart is going, how your emotions is an emotional thing. Like I always say, there are Torah scholars and there are righteous people. And it's much easier to determine who a Torah scholar is than what we call tzaddik, someone righteous. Why? Because a Torah scholar, you speak to them, you go to their class, you ask them questions. There's some objective criteria that a person knows something. But a righteous person, like, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean he's a tzaddik? It's a very vague term. It's kind of thing we know when we see it, but it's still hard to define. So to say I violate something in my heart, like, what does that mean? How do I know when my heart? So that's what Ryan says. We have to put a measuring stick on it. So it's true. How do we know when you went too far? When you actually take the object. But the sin isn't taking the object per se. That's just more of a sign. That's a siman. It's really a sin in your heart. But what's the sign that you've gone too far? When you've taken the object, that shows that desire in your heart has gone too far, and you passed the threshold, and you violated the sin of coveting someone else's property. So that's why there's no punishment, because it's not a sin of action, it's a sin in your heart. That's what Jimmy Carter used to always say, something like he committed adultery in the heart. I guess he thought about adultery, so therefore, so that's what Maimonides is saying here, that it's really, there's no punishment because there is no action. I mean, of course there is an action, but the action is only a sign to show how far have you gone, and you've gone too far, and therefore that's the explanation of Maimonides, and that's what we can understand. He said, Maimonides said, study if you want to understand the secret of Lo Sachmod. Study very hard what happened with King Achav and Izebel, because what do we see what happened with Achav? Sometimes you can have a desire so strong, and unfortunately we read about it all the time. Rage is usually a husband killing a wife or beating a wife. It could be the opposite also once in a while. But usually people go into such a jealous rage and they just go crazy and they kill the person, they hit the person, that we see sometimes your heart gets so caught up, your rage is so strong, you totally lose control. So the Rabbi is saying, look, study the portion of Achav very well. Look at Achav over a field he wanted so much, he was ended up willing to kill someone. He was willing to murder someone. So let me ask you something. I need the Rambam to tell me that. Don't we all know that obviously killing someone to take their field, we all know is wrong. So obviously the Rambam's not telling me that. The Rambam's telling me something much deeper than that. To be an Achav, everyone knows is wrong. But the Rambam is telling me, don't be a novice either. That you realize when someone, it happens all the time, you deal with people that's so stubborn. And he's a husband and wife, they're meant for each other. Some people are so stubborn, like you can't even there's no way, you can't talk to them, you can't get a word in. And then it's the worst thing, because, is the parallel I like use. Let's say you're walking across the street, it's green for you, but you see some drunk driver speeding down a 20-mile-an-hour street going 50 miles an hour. But it's green, I don't care. I'm walking, it's green. And I say, yeah, you're right. You're dead right, as the saying goes. You might be right, but you're dead. Do you want to be right, or you want to be alive? Or a lot of people tell, like when I tell, people, before they get married, you have a choice. You either can be right or happy. You want to listen to your wife and be happy, or you want to be right? It's not a matter of right or happy. It doesn't always. You could be right and unhappy. It doesn't make a difference. Obviously, or it could be the reverse also. Whoever I'm talking to, I'll tell it to the other person. But you want to be dead right. You're real. The Rabbi doesn't have to tell me, don't be an achav. Of course, don't go into a rage and kill someone. Of course, it's obvious. But don't be a novice. Sometimes you can get so caught up in your own it's the principle. I always hear people say, I don't really care, but it's the principle involved. When I hear that, usually it's not the principle. They can't get over the emotional event of it, and they're giving in. They just can't get over it. That it's both ways. Even when you're right, don't be stubborn. Of course, it's easy. Of course, Achav was wrong, but even when you're right, sometimes you have to see. Why novice? Just give you. You see, he's going crazy. He's the king. Just give him the land. Like novice should have learned from that. Okay, and then worry about getting a lady. You see, someone's in a rage, whether husband, wife, just give them what they want. Just don't be like, it's mine. I'm not giving it. Don't be. You have to learn that lesson also. When someone's in a rage, you can't talk to them. And in fact, so that's what Maimonides is explaining. What is Losachmo, the secret of the Ten Commandments? It doesn't belong. It's minor leagues. It's with murder and all that. And the answer is because it's the root of all the mitzvahs. Let's take Shabbos for a second. So some people look at Shabbos, especially in the summer months. Oh wow, overburdened. It's such a long day. I can't do anything. I can't do this. All they see in Shabbos is the don'ts. Don't do this. Don't do that. And obviously there are. I'm not saying there aren't don'ts, but they miss the beauty of Shabbos. Oh, coming to a nice, Friday night davening, going home, having a nice meal, a little rest, spend time with, family, whatever, taking a walk with the family, your wife, whatever it is. There's the beauty of Shabbos also. So you can focus on the more formal, more rigid rules, or you can see what's behind the Shabbos. We need the rules. The rules are important also. In order to create the feeling of Shabbos, you need different rules. But it's not that the rules aren't the important things. The rules is to create the message. So for instance, let's say by comforting the mourners. Again, I'm not downplaying the rules, but let's say you cover up the mirrors, you sit on the low ground. But if you do all that, but basically you don't feel anything, you're not really fulfilling your mitzvah of mourning. Mourning's in your heart. But in order to do things, and we do it for all things, we give rituals, and we try to give you in the format where the emotions will come out. So of course the main thing is feeling the loss of whoever you lost. But that's why the Rabbi said, sit on the ground, don't do this, you have to stay home, Shiva, to create the feeling. Shabbos also. In an ideal world, you'll be able to get the feeling without it. But to get the feeling, the Torah gives us the rules, how a Shabbos should look like. But the essence is the feeling of the Shabbos, not that don't do that, that's just a necessary thing. Don't kill. You need laws in society not to murder, or else you can't. But the essence is, what do you mean not to murder? The point is, but realize the message. Why not murder? Every person is born in the image of God, and everyone's a human. In other words, you have to go through each of the 10 commandments and see that's a Losachmo. It's number 10. That's the essence of all of them. It's not just keep the Shabbos, honor your parents, don't murder. Of course, those are true, but the essence is honor my parents. Have akaras, have gratitude for everything they did to you. They brought you into the world. That's what it means. Losachmo is number 10. It's the bottom line. It's the rule of all of them. If you learn very well number 10, then you'll learn the secret of all of them. That it's not just the physical act, the external part that's important. That's usually there just to create the atmosphere and not to violate it. But the essence is what's behind the Shabbos. Why not to murder? Because the value of human life. Why honor parents? Because honoring elders honors people brought in the world. And if you go down and study each one, and you get down to the essence of the commandment, then you'll appreciate Lo Sachmo. And that's why it made the top 10 list, because it's the essence of all. And as we pointed out, they're all equally important. That's why God put them all together in one utterance. And that's what the Maharal explains, that the number 10 is the essence, because that's how it teaches me about all of them, that it's not just physical acts behind the prohibitions, but it's to learn the meaning and the philosophy behind Shabbos, honoring parents, etc. And that's what you have to study, and that's what the Rambam points out. Even though you don't violate it until you actually take the object, but it's the prohibitions in the heart. The act's is coincidental. Okay, you took it, now I know your heart desired it too much. But the action's incidental, it's the prohibition is believe, and that's the essence of Lo Sachmod. It's a feeling in the heart. That's the essence of all the commandments. And as we said, because of Sajagon says the 10 commandments, 6 plus 1 plus 3 equal 10. If this is the foundation of the 10 commandments, this concept is the foundation of the whole Torah, is to get down, not just, we have to get, sometimes, so there's so many things, learning, it's kosher, a lot of times we get so caught up, and we have to do them, they're important, but you get so caught up in all the technical laws of kosher or shot, and we lose a lot of times, we lose the essence. We have to keep the laws, but we have to realize sometimes that we have to learn and look for the beauty, what's behind all of them, and we can appreciate it more. And then it's not such a burden on us, but we have to turn it from a burden to something that is beautiful and easy. And when you love what you're doing, like anything in life, it's much easier to do as well.